Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 151 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to prepare the factory for growing gardens. Enjoy! So, this setup to generate gardens is going to be pretty straightforward, really. Where we're going to have 4 of these, working the water down until it gets to thin, and then we'll need to siphon some of it off to make the sand. And then the last one can be in there making the saline water. So that gets us all the liquids and the sand. The last thing is soil, and on second thought, what does soil go into? A couple of things. I just kind of don't want to bother making a bunch of soil. We would need 3.4. When we've already got this, making it probably pretty big numbers. Yeah, 6.75. So we could just kind of put that on a drone and call it good. So actually, this is ending up not being very complicated because we could actually use some direct insertion. So for example, let's say we had a warehouse. That would probably be hilariously too large, but let's just say like a chest or something. We'll figure it out later. But we had a farm right here. Let's say it was connected to here, and this was generating the gardens from nothing. We can have that one in there inserting into this chest, and then we would have the other farm right next to it generating the gardens from other gardens, also inputting directly into that. And then we would have a long-handed inserter starting the beltless chain down to all of the seed extractors. There's essentially going to be 2 sets of them. The bigger set is the ones making the plant life samples, and the smaller set would be making the seeds. But it would basically be like that, and those could go wherever they need to, and pipes would go where they need to, fertilizer would go, compost would go, but whatever. It's a fairly small, unimportant setup here, so it's just kind of a little logistically complicated. Alright, well, we can make this fertilizer, and potentially the alien fertilizer as well. But let's see. I don't know where the best place would be to make this. Well, since this is all chemically related, probably should make it over here where all the chemicals are. And that's something we can kind of also build out of the way and then make it fit. So we need our air. And then it looks like 1 to 1 to 1 up until the end. Let's see if the pipes line up here. Taking a step further. Making the urea. And it does. And then the last part of this is the 4 machines making the actual compost. But it looks like it's got the wrong chemical plant on there, because since this has 3 inputs, it actually needs to be in an advanced chemical plant. And do the numbers look right there? Probably not, because it looks like it's changing things, because we still need 0.7 fertilizer as an input. So let's see, how big can we make this and have it line up? Probably something like that, like 9 and then 1 to 1 to 1. I don't think I have any advanced chemical plants sitting around. So it would be something like this. Inserters in the middle. We can kind of connect both sides and then sort of line this up here. Then the ammonia needs to be split off. And actually what's funny is we can just take the input from the other side of the machine here just to make straight pipes for the ammonia going up there. Nitric acid can connect from wherever. Carbon dioxide will connect from wherever. The water output can go wherever. And that'll be an input. That'll be an output. And that'll be connected. And it needs to go somewhere. Well, actually, there's really not many places for it to go. It's a little large. See, there's not too many open spaces, and I don't really want to be squishing things in here if we can avoid it. So actually, this isn't the worst place in the world to put it. So, yeah, let's put it here. It'll have to move if sulfur needs to be upgraded, but that's kind of the name of the game at this point. Eventually, this stuff's going to be decentralized. But for now, we kind of need to arbitrarily pick somewhere for it all to go. Although, kind of worried that there's not a lot of the input pipes, actually. Right here. Because it needs, like, carbon dioxide, and the hydrogen, and all that stuff, which is kind of all up here, so... I know I just said I don't want to put it here, but all the pipes are right here. Well, I mean, it is a big empty space. So, for the purposes of making the pipes cleaner, let's drop it in here. Then we can kind of point it down and have... Let's move it up a little bit so there's more room for pipes if necessary, but not too high. Because we have the supply depots down here. And we'll fill it up to, say, like 2,000 or 5 drones. So we got to get all this hooked up. Process is kind of going to start already. But let's just pipe oxygen into the rest of the system. Then we need to pipe the hydrogen in, which we can do right there. This does require the red metal catalysts, which are kind of frustrating to keep making in small numbers on site here, but not many options with the way the factory's set up. However, we can try to use the same depot. Then this belt can come from here and have a splitter in there. So that's going to start making all that ammonia and filling up the system. It will let all these catalysts generate. So we have an output, a small amount, but an output nonetheless, of water. I would like to try to use it. If we send it up here, it will connect with the other water that's being generated from the other urea generation and go along the same path to maybe get used. So let's send it up. It is an annoying pipe just by itself up here, but oh well. Then we need to get this carbon dioxide in here and out of pipes. And it can hook up right here with everything else. And there we go. Making the urea. Filling everything up again. I know, seem to be going okay. We'll test it out in a second here. Because the last thing we need is to hook up the acid. Which should be from right around here somewhere. Yeah, we got some nitric acid coming in through this pipe. So we can keep it going. Or connect up here, which I don't know if that would actually be cleaner because of the position of all these pipes. So it might be better to go straight up and down. Oh man, it frustratingly almost lines up. That is kind of annoying, but oh well. There we go. This kind of sound a little loud. Advanced chemical plants. Might want to look at the volume of that, so sorry, but there's all that yummy fertilizer. And And actually, it looks like this inserter just might be a little too slow. That might be a potential problem here. This one's really loud. I have to stand quite far away. Okay, we got green, because it should be these all beyond basically all the time. And it's okay for those to flash. But this is the 1-to-1 ratio. Then 1-to-1 to 9, basically. That seems pretty good. Good thing we're generating nitric acid now, because this is probably going to use a ton of it. But we're making our fertilizer. So we'll let that run happily for a little while. And one thing that's been going on that I haven't really mentioned, because I keep forgetting, is that if you notice, we've got 14K of sodium hydroxide just chilling out here. And this is a supply depot, so that's not how it's supposed to work. And it all stems back from this on-off setting that we're using to keep these supply and request depots from fighting each other. And for some reason, it seems to just be with the transport drones, but it doesn't like equals 0. Like, normal Factorio is if a signal doesn't exist, then it is 0. But I think transport drones is taking the signal as not existing as not equaling 0 because it doesn't exist, so it can't equal 0. So that's not how Factorio works. So since this one is set to greater than 0, this should probably be set to less than or equal 0. So you see we hit that, and now suddenly it's fine. There's still no signal. But now it's very eagerly going to grab all of those sodium hydroxides. And that's kind of interesting because sodium hydroxide is something that's a little hard to come across. And we had so much of it just sitting there. So that'll be nice to get on the bus here. That error probably also exists with mud. So we probably want to take a look at that. But it seems like mud is basically working properly. Because you see it's supposed to be between like 1 and 10,000 basically. So as long as that number is between those 2 points, it's okay. It generates it if it gets below 1,000, and it turns it into landfill if it gets above 10,000. So nonetheless, we probably still want to look at those riders next time we're down there. And as far as the crystal production is concerned, it's generating it properly, and it looks like it's being taken because it only has 76 left over. What about with the farms here? Yeah. So it seems like that one's working okay, but I don't know, maybe the number is different. In that sense, I kind of want to go down there and see why it's working okay when it doesn't seem like it should be. Unless maybe that's just a problem with sodium hydroxide. That'd be kind of weird, but maybe that's the problem. Also, kind of want to check on all of our chemicals here. And it's a little hard to get all these numbers in here, but it's kind of how they are. So instead of having to hover, we can kind of see what the percentages of all these should be. This should be basically below 80. Some of it is generally saved, so that's why it's around 20. But what's interesting is the mineral oil is getting kind of low. And that is because we finally used up the rest of the factory's mineral oil, so now we need to actually start using it again instead of burning it away. Now we still might need to burn it away. There's a non-return valve. I don't think we need that there. But it's time to finally hook this up. And I guess I'll leave the request depot there, even though it's not really doing anything anymore. But you never know when it's going to start getting used. And this pipe is annoyingly not straight. I guess it can't be straight because this other pipe is in the way. That kind of explains that, but it's also very frustrating. But we'll go like that, which is going to start using it up. And this system is set up based on the consumption of fuel oil, not mineral oil. So it's possible that we will use mineral oil faster than the fuel oil, and we'll have to change the way that this logic is set up, so that'll work properly. But for now, we'll see how it works. Since the factory isn't really doing anything, it's all very quiet out here. Not much to really see right now. Okay, let's check mud real quick while I'm thinking about it. So I'm kind of curious. Whoops. Well, something got destroyed. Ah, how late. I can kind of probably tear down all these poles. I've been kind of doing that in other places. Because now that we have night vision, we don't really need to have... Whoops, again. Well, that was just bricks. Bricks and drones, who needed them? Don't really know how many drones were there to begin with. But, let's put 5 in there. But since we have night vision now, we don't really need to have lights everywhere. It's still kind of nice to have some more color, but sight isn't as much of a problem as it used to be. And actually, one other thing I kind of want to do, I've kind of noticed that I've destroyed a few supply depots in driving. Well, the problem is they don't have very much health. Like you see, this supply depot has 150 health, compared to other buildings like the washing plant that has 300. I guess the clarifiers don't have very much, but like the tank has 500, the farm has 300, 1500 for the storehouse, 350 for the assembling machine. I mean, even the belts are 150, so it's kind of weird that you have such a fairly large, easy to crash into building with a low health. So I'm thinking of going in there and upping the health of those, so perhaps they stop exploding. But we got our things here. Ah, this is why it's working, is because it has a combinator doing the work compared to just reading the signal directly. So the problem before is we were having it to where both of the depots were off, where we want it to be a binary condition where either one depot is off and one is on, or they're inverted. But when you have a combinator here, it can only have one or the other output. Either it has the green square or it doesn't, so that's why this wasn't affected by that weird logic. Okay, that makes sense. And actually, talking about buses and removing poles has reminded me that I did make a fairly significant change to this setup here, where I added some logic to it. So the problem that we were having, and this might have been contributing to being overloaded on certain resources, like aluminum or tin here. The problem is that there was no logic about where these resources went to. So let's say crushed sapphirite. So there was logic in the resources being produced. But the problem is that this is way more consumption that we can ever fill up. It was never designed for every one of these to run at the same time. It was designed for all of the inputs to be consumed, not necessarily all of the outputs to be produced. So the problem you have is what happens if you have multiple machines turning on at the same time. And this can happen quite often because let's say a train comes in and it needs 40,000 ores or something like that. Well, these warehouses don't hold that. So very quickly they start emptying and the lesser processes turn on. Now we can kind of lower that effect a little bit by increasing the minimum amount of ore in all these warehouses to be the size of a train. But the problem is that's actually a lot of resources, and these warehouses wouldn't have very much space in them for buffer. So I kind of decided against that. And it's okay for the less desirable methods to turn on because the most desirable method produces the ore quite quickly. So you see how 3 red belts go out, but 2 red belts go in, producing it the best possible way. So it's pretty close to parity there. But still, eventually multiple methods will turn on. And then where does the sapphirite go if it has multiple paths? Well, there's really no logic to it. It's just the way the splitters are set up. And that can be fine with certain setups, but with this one, it created a bit of an error. So a solution to this is to have many belts, and it was done this way. So obviously we can't produce this much copper. We only have our 3 belts of input here. So we'd get like 4, 4.5, something like that about, but we can't produce this much. But each consumption point gets its own belt. So what that means is if you want to create logic about which machines get priority when there's not enough resources, you can just come down here and say, this belt, actually I kind of did something similar to that over here, where the iron going up is for creating the plates and the iron going to the right is for making steel. Well, the problem is every time, like an Invar train came through, it would just annihilate the iron. So I put this here to give a priority to where this warehouse has to have at least a little bit of iron in it for the extra to go out towards the steel. Specifically, the problem being is that it was interfering with this setup's ability to use the manganese ore efficiently. So you can do that and create any logic you want as long as you have individual belts going to each machine. Now you can still do it when you don't do it this way, because this is more belts than you need, really, so it takes up a lot of space and a lot of belts. But this setup wasn't built with this in mind, and in fact it's kind of a little narrow in here because we still need 2 more spaces just for these catalysts right here. So it's a little cramped. We can't really do that. So we only have the space for the 1 belt. So what I did was I created some logic. And let's go over there so I can click on things and show the logic. Won't really be able to see it operating until the factory starts doing stuff again, but eventually we'll get back there. But I kind of want to talk about it just so I don't forget. So if you're curious and you're looking, it's like, what are all those changes? You didn't say anything about that. What is all the new logic? So I kind of want to talk about it now, so it is out of the way. So to set this up, you need to think of what is the priority of each ore, and where do you want it to go? Well, for making iron here, to make it the most efficient way, requires sapphirite and givelite. So those are the inputs, and because this is a logic system, it needs to have a warehouse. And we don't need to fill this warehouse up, it's not a buffer, it's just here for logic. So it has these conditions here just to fill up the warehouse with 1,000 of each ore, and then it's good. And they just go out and get consumed as needed. And I have some combinators here to show you the amount of each type. So the bottom combinator here is for givelite, and that shows you we have 1,005 of that, and 1,005 the one on the top. But basically what this looks at is to see, is the warehouse mostly full with the ore that we need? So let's say 900 out of 1,000. If it is, and this is where it gets annoying, it has to send a signal. But we can't just send, say, a sapphirite signal because there's other sapphirite logics in here. So it has to annoyingly send a 1. And it's independently looking at, does it have enough givelite? If so, send a 2. So we go to the next system here. Stereotype and Crotinium. That is 3 and 4 because this is the most ideal way of using those 2 resources. But then things start getting a little different here with rubite and crotinium. Rubite, this is the best way of using rubite, so it's just puts out a 6 if it gets it. And you notice how crotinium, if it has enough crotinium, it's putting out a 5. So that's kind of why we can't just put a crotinium on the thing, because this is also here. So what this does is it creates a new condition besides just seeing, does a warehouse have 1,000? It's also looking, is condition 4 basically exist? Is it greater than 0? And condition 4 is, this warehouse has its resources. If that is the case, then it will let the crotinium come into this warehouse and fill up. And the same kind of works here. Bobmonium has no previous condition, so it's just a 7. And stereotyte is coming in here, and it's 8. And it requires that 3 exists. And if we come back here to 3, 3 is stereotyte for making copper. So basically copper is getting priority over making tin. And that makes sense. Copper is generally more important than tin. And also copper is generally more important than lead. So that's why it gets a priority over these 2. So that covers the most efficient ways of making resources. Then we have to go down the line. What's the less efficient method from those? Well, we run to the end here, and it's making the powders. So we kind of have a little complicated thing here because I wanted to get all these Nixie tubes in here, but basically just line it up with the first number. So 1,005 of sapphirite, 1,004 of givelite, 1,004 of rubite. And since I didn't want to keep going with numbers because I was running out of them and it would be complicated, I switched to letters. So this warehouse has some requirements for resources. Of course, it wants to be filled to 1,000, so it's always trying to do that, and it doesn't need to be filled with more than that, so it stops. But also, each resource requires that the previous item in the chain of priorities is okay. So it's looking to see, is the 1 signal exist? And the 1 signal is sapphirite from making iron because that's the last place it was used. And that's all that exists for there. And then Givelite. Does the 2 signal exist for Givelite? You come down here and the 2 signal, the last place it was used is right here. And that's fine. And finally, for Rubite, the 6 signal, which is being produced right here. So that one's pretty straightforward. And each one of those resources is calculated independently. So as long as these get all 3 of their inputs, they will work and they will be consumed. So there's no logic setting here. So basically, if it stops getting its resources, eventually these guys will no longer have access to their inputs. So there's a small delay there, but that's okay. This is where most of the logic needs to be, not up there. But things get a little more complicated with these colors, because it's possible that the most desirable method of making something doesn't have its resources, but the less desirable one does. So instead of looking at just what's higher up in the chain, it has to look at everything that's higher up in the chain. For stereotype here, we need to be below 1,000, of course. And then it's looking to see if 8 exists and if 3 exists. 3 is for making copper right here, and 8 is for making tin. So it's checking to see, does the copper production and the tin production have the stereotype that it needs? If it does, fine. Turn it on and they go. And then the 5 condition and the 4 condition for crotinium, and the 7 for bobmonium. And then these will create their outputs, A through F, just saying that their condition has been met, and to send that signal down to anything else that's relevant. And here's the signal wire. You see how it's just a jumble of numbers. Well, that's because everybody is happy, so everything is reporting a 1 signal. But you follow it down to the least desirable methods, which is directly processing the crushed ores. Now, it doesn't need to have a condition about being greater than 1,000 or less than 1,000 because there's no storage warehouse. It's just a straight belt. But like with Rubite, it's checking to see, does 6 exist and does C exist? 6 is for making lead, and C is for these powderizers here. So it's looking at all above conditions, and since they exist, it's sending it out. Doing the same for sapphirite, the same for bobmonium. But these last 2, crotinium and stereotype, have multiple conditions, so it's checking D, 8, and 3. 3 is here, 8 is here, and D is here. So it's basically all above conditions are good. And if so, send the ore through. And that's basically how that's set up. And like I said before, no logic exists for these combined ores because it's already down at their production, so it doesn't need to be up here at consumption. And no logic exists for the chunks yet because this is the only place that chunks can go, so they don't need any logic. So that's kind of how that setup works to give priority to certain machines. And all of that can be avoided by just running tons of belts like this, and just having the logic directly attached to the warehouse that is producing the ores to begin with, and based on its level, just turn on or off different belts. So that's the easy way, if you had space to do it, but space doesn't exist here, so we had to do that. But back on track here, we are producing our fertilizer. We kind of want to make sure everything else we need is on a network or something. And I think I kind of changed my mind about this soil. So we're going to remove that and just send soil in on a drone. And compost is already on drones, so we could probably send that up just fine as well without any changes. And then the rest of the setup is just the water processing, and that should start generating our gardens. So we'll just pick this up. Nothing to it, really. And we need to put soil on a drone. And what is the best way to do that? It's kind of a giant mess no matter how it's done. But let's put a belt in here. and just go straight and put a supply depot in there in the same 2000 setting. And that'll run a while and fill up. A little inefficient doing it that way, but this is only going to run for a temporary amount of time, so it should probably be okay. And I think we have everything we need to generate the initial gardens. So let's go up there and start that process to give it as much time as possible to populate before we build the rest of it. But that's the end of this episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.